Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to the final panel of JHU Grad Camp 2021, titled, What Can I Do with My Doctoral Degree Outside of Academia? Thanks for sticking around to the very end of grad camp. I hope you've all been able to take a lot of insightful information away from the amazing sessions offered over the last 2 days. My name is Marta. I'm a fifth-year chemistry PhD student at the Krieger School of Arts and Sciences, and I have the privilege of moderating today's discussion. So I just wanted to start with briefly introducing our speakers. We have Dr. Julian Rosenberg, who is the Associate Director for the Center of Biopharmaceutical Education and Training at the Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. We have Rachel Waxman, who is a current PhD candidate in history at Hopkins and soon to be business analyst at Tuscany Strategy Consulting. And Dr. Smiti Nathan, who is Assistant Director of Life Design for Biological, Environmental, and Physical Sciences at JHU Homewood's Life Design Lab. So I'd also like to take this opportunity right off the bat to thank all of you for being here. You're all familiar with JHU in a variety of ways and will undoubtedly give our viewers some great insight on the flavors of careers that doctoral students can pursue with their degrees. I'm very excited to be here and moderate this discussion and look forward to our conversation. For our participants, feel free to ask questions relevant to the moderated discussion within the chat feature. I'll do my very best to incorporate them as we go. And for the last 10 minutes or so, we'll have an open Q&A session where I will refer to those questions and any that come in at that time. So don't be shy and be sure to stick around until the very end for a little fun question I'll be posing to the panelists and sort of hearing their thoughts that they haven't been briefed on. So it'll be a super genuine and fun response. So to get us started, I'd love to just really briefly hear all of you tell us a bit about yourselves. So Julian, can you give us a brief background, perhaps about your education and experiences and how you ended up where you are today?
Sure. Thanks, Marta. Great to be here. So I was kind of a long hauler at Hopkins. I did my undergrad, master's, and PhD at Hopkins, all in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. And after I finished my doctoral degree, I was involved in some startups actually while I was a grad student and then continued on after for a few years. Then I worked in industry for 5 years. Being a chemical engineer and at the interface of chem and bio, I worked for a company, mid-sized company, and I was the director of R&D there for 5 years. And interestingly, I've now just made a transition back to academia, but still at the interface of academia and industry in that our center is training a workforce for the biopharmaceutical industry.
It's really interesting, that transition sort of back and forth, but still towing that line between those two worlds. Rachel, how about you? Can you give us a little bit of a background on how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, so I'm currently in my last year of the PhD in history, and I did my undergrad at Northwestern, and then that was in history, and I studied music as well. After that, I worked for a few years doing a little bit of this, a little of that. I was in New York working in advertising. I worked at a wine store. I moved to Montreal. I was kind of all over the place, just trying out different things, seeing if anything was appealing, career-wise. I ended up then deciding to apply to grad school. So kind of did that whole thing, and now I'm finding myself, in a sense, sort of back where I started, but with a PhD. So back kind of, back to the sort of industry side of things. So I'm happy to talk about the decision of how I, came into grad school and then sort of, went back to where I started. So.
Yeah, it seems like you have been able to sort of merge together all of your passions and interests over the years and come full circle throughout your career trajectory. So that's great to hear. Smiti, can you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I went to George Washington University, where I majored in archaeology and anthropology, and then I went straight into a master's program at UCL, University College London, which I loved. But after today's boot camp, probably not the best decision-making process and how that happened. But it was a degree in GIS and archaeology. So right after I graduated from my master's, I did a bit of archaeology, like academic work in India, but then I got a job as a geospatial analyst, and I did that for about a year, and then decided to go back for my PhD in anthropology, archaeology. After I graduated, and I was looking at industry jobs and academia jobs, and I landed a design thinking internship at Zeiss, an optics firm in Germany. And did that for a couple months, and then landed a postdoc here at Hopkins in the library doing like geospatial data curation, management, and other things, and then transitioned to being a life design educator at Johns Hopkins. So there's a lot more in there, like there is for like Julian and Rachel, but that's the kind of path.
I love all the traveling going on and all of the sort of life experiences and worldly experiences. So I'm super excited to hear more about the details of those processes and sort of career paths. So our audience here is a mixture of students at various stages of their careers, undergrads and grads alike. And as we all know, these careers come with many decisions to make, both very big and small day-to-day ones. So I'd love to hear a little bit about each of your experiences in making these decisions that have gotten you to where you are today. So can you take us back to the moment where you were beginning to contemplate your next steps during your grad school career and sort of while graduating, and touch upon perhaps maybe starting with why you decided to get a doctoral degree in the first place, and if a career outside of academia was always the plan from the start, or if there was a sort of turning point that had you branch out from plans to go into academia, and maybe if there was anything that you realized about entering the academic job market that deterred you from that path. So this is a very loaded question. I'm happy to reiterate and sort of repeat as we go forward. Feel free to tackle any sort of component of it because all of it is super interesting. So Smiti, how about we start with you since you just finished off?
Sure. So I'd say the decision to go for the doctoral degree, there's maybe like three parts to it. There was a little bit of ego, you know, like I thought that's the way you're supposed to like be like an established archaeologist, is to have a PhD. That is not true, but was my preconception. I was also at like the company that I was working at, like all the senior people had PhDs. So I also kind of felt that like, okay, if I want to advance, like I need a PhD in like something. But mainly it's because I really wanted to deeply explore questions surrounding food in ancient societies around the Indian Ocean. So that's what really, you know, made me bite the bullet and like apply. So when I started graduate school, I intended to not be in academia. And then as graduate school went on, like I was like, okay, like maybe I'll do academia. And then after I graduated, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I want a job, like I want income. And so it was a lot of back and forth. So in terms of like the decision-making process, like I will say that what it might be interesting for people, like the field that I was interested in exploring outside of archaeology was like design and design thinking. And so I only learned about the field like the year I was graduating, and I was like, oh, and it's a very hard field to break into. So I was like, okay, I just need to find a role to get started. So after I graduated, a couple months after, I took up an internship in design thinking. And then I was finding like, oh man, this is like really hard to break into. And that role was in Germany. And there's a whole different cultural difference when it comes to like degrees and jobs and language that I'm happy to talk about later. But I was like, okay, I don't know if this design thinking thing is really going to work out. And then an opportunity for a postdoc came up. So I took it. Then, I got pregnant, like, and I was just like, okay, postdocs are very like limited, and to be fair, it wasn't a fit for me. And so through my network and actually like knowing Justin Lawrence here, like, and he knew my interests and he was trying to like help me transition, this role of life design educator came up, and it felt like a good fit in that moment about where I was. And so that's one thing I would also emphasize, like, as you're transitioning out, like you don't have to make a forever decision. You just need to like make a decision that feels good in that moment with like the information that you have like for the next step. So in terms of deciding whether to stay or go in academia, I did have kind of a crossroads decision where, you know, a magical kind of unicorn perfect postdoc came up while I was in my role. But because of, you know, honestly, therapy and like, you know, focusing on my mental and like physical health, I was able to identify my value system that better for me. And I realized for myself that like key things that are important for me, specifically flexibility, diversity, and challenging what ideas of success are, because like I want to perform well, and if I don't feel like I'm like doing my best, or if it's not being recognized, it really impacts my curiosity, and curiosity is another key value of mine. Those things weren't going to be filled by academia for me personally. But I also realized that like I'm still an archaeologist, even without like an academic position. So now as I go on, I'm going to wrap this up because I want to hear everyone else's response. I view kind of like my work and my curiosity as projects. And so like my identity is not so much intertwined with my job title or what my degree is in. It's more kind of holistic in terms of like, okay, what are the cool projects that I'm pursuing that excite me? So that was a lot. So I'm gonna need my
perfect. That was like the perfect response. There was so much in there. I was trying to scribble and take notes so I can share with the Twitterverse. But I love that idea of identity. And so often, people think that all they have to do is live to work, but it sounds like you structured what you wanted to do to your life and how you felt you wanted to live your life. And that's great to hear. So Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to get a doctoral degree and sort of any sort of trajectories and changes in your decisions and career path choices that you might have stumbled upon along the way?
Yeah, so in terms of why I got a PhD, my reasons were probably, I'm having internet issues, so it's good. My reasons were pretty vague. I had this sort of idea that I wanted to sort of be a scholar and like write history books and do academic things, but I didn't ever really see myself as a professor, which was kind of an odd thing. I don't know what exactly I thought I would be able to do with the degree. So I was sort of like, oh, this is sort of a direction that will be interesting that, like this PhD will take me in. Probably not the best way to go about it, but that's what I did. And so I went through the program kind of like Smiti, where I didn't like really want an academic job, but 3 years in, maybe I should want an academic job. And I was like, no, I don't know if I want one. I'm like, no, maybe I could do this. Maybe this is something I would like doing. And so I went through this huge crisis of not wanting to admit that I didn't really want an academic job and like feeling like I should want one. And it was back and forth for like 3 years, like totally crazy. I was sort of obsessed with it. It took me, I think it was in my it was my 6th year. Yeah, it was about a little over a year ago, where I finally started thinking a bit harder about the question of what I actually wanted to do after the degree. And my turning point was on a research trip. I was sort of, I was in California. I was away from Hopkins and all the people I knew there. I was connecting with some friends that were doing like very non-academic stuff. And just sort of like being outside of the academic bubble kind of got me thinking more seriously about what it would be like to do something that's not in academia. And I had long been interested in consulting, but I was sort of unsure about some of the things about the industry. So I was put in touch with a friend of a friend to talk about consulting. And through that conversation, I was like, let's do this. Like, let's go for this. Like, maybe I think this is what I'd like to do. Because of the way consulting works, once you're interested in doing it, you're kind of put on this recruiting cycle where you have to like prepare for the interviews and do this networking. So it's sort of a natural thing to get into. There's something I think appealing about that for grad students who like a sort of structure. So I ended up down that path, and I just sort of, was preparing for interviews and interviewing with different companies, and finally landed this job that I'm starting in the summer. So it was very much sort of a long process of indecision, and then kind of having a moment that came sort of like externally with being away from Hopkins, that I kind of was able to make a decision. And I still have like certain qualms about kind of leaving academia, which I always put in quotes, which I'll talk about that later. But I think you're unsure until you actually do the thing. So yeah, so I think I'll
For sure.
wrap it up there.
Yeah, as someone who sort of toggles back and forth between what I want to do, especially over the last year or so, and having like COVID be a thing in this world, it's definitely raised a lot of those questions and sort of made me reflect on what exactly I see myself doing. And it's definitely not the most fun experience, but you guys have all gotten through it. So I know that with lots of thought and insight, it can be done. So that sort of brings me to posing these questions to Julian. So can you also touch on, Julian, whether or not you were very aware of non-academic career options while you were at Hopkins or in grad school or at any point in your studies? Because I think that's super important to share with our viewers and touch on that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have to say that I was really immersed in non-academic opportunities. So in the lab that I was in as a PhD student, we had significant collaborations in industry, mostly in biopharmaceutical, bioprocessing, biomanufacturing. So I was very aware of what that industry was like and what research looked like from an academic perspective and how it can be translated to the biotechnology industry, really. I have to say, though, what Rachel said, I think what everyone's kind of touched on is we all seem to have this drive or interest in maybe pursuing uncharted territory and thought leadership, and kind of that is what a PhD is to me. I similarly would never have pinned myself as a professor or want to necessarily teach. And maybe that was just a maturity level at that time. But I knew that I liked research a lot. I had a passion for learning new things and exploring new things. So I really originally had not a very strong drive to even pursue a PhD. As I said, I was at Hopkins, I was in a 5-year BS/MS program. So I was perfectly happy ending with that terminal degree. And then my plan was to join a company and do that. As I said, through Hopkins again, I was connected with some collaborators and had the opportunity to co-found a startup company and work for other startup companies in this ecosystem in Baltimore, which is really great and has grown a lot over the past decade. So I would say I didn't join, let's say, conventional like big pharma, big industry like that, but took this next step to explore this entrepreneurial spirit that I had and get involved in startup companies, see what that was like. And what really made it for me, or to transition back into a PhD program, was just to push myself further and see what I could do even further. Someone else mentioned like senior level positions at companies doing research usually have doctoral degrees. So that was maybe my ambition, something that I wanted to get to. And after my master's degree, I did do a little job searching and learned that, yeah, after a master's degree, of course, you can transition into industry and move up the ladder there with a master's. But having a PhD and a little bit of more of an authoritative view on your area of expertise, you can make a bigger impact when you do go to industry.
So thank you for that. It seems like collectively, all three of your responses indicate that there are a lot of factors that go into deciding whether or not to go for a doctoral degree and then what to do with it. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions that comes up with all of those factors once they start merging together and forming that graduate career is that when you go through grad school and you get a PhD, your only option is to go into academia and become a professor in your field of training. And as our three panelists here have shown, that's not true. And what I think is really important to share here with our viewers is that grad school goes way beyond just teaching us skills directly related to the field we're studying. So I wanted to hear a little bit about the skills that you gained during your doctoral studies, whether they were soft skills, any sort of skills that you can think of that were most valuable or most transferable to your current career choice. And Rachel, we'll start with you. And since you're sort of in this transitional period as we're speaking, which is great, congratulations on your upcoming graduation. What skills do you think were most impressive or had the most weight during the application process for your non-academic job that you have coming up? We might have lost Rachel, so hold on. Julian, would you like to maybe touch on this? And
I can jump in for sure.
Yeah.
So in my field, at least, I think that, well, maybe in everyone's field, but publications in particular, having that on your resume, like that holds a lot of weight. So as I said, like the ability to have, that's showing that you have accomplished a project, brought it to fruition, learned something new enough to get something into the peer-reviewed literature, at least in science and engineering, probably in all fields though, but that holds a lot of weight. So I think that is generally expected for all PhD programs. But I think the skill I learned was writing those types of papers and writing review articles. So really, there's a learning curve, certainly, but trying to jump in as early as possible in your doctoral work to start mapping out what is my project potentially going to turn into and what papers might come out of it. And even if that never happens, that's fine. It changes trajectories all the time. But wrapping your head around what am I going to write about? How am I going to frame it? Was a very important skill. I think the other skill I would say, like I touched on before, having a few projects and collaborations with industry during your doctoral experience also holds a lot of weight if you're trying to get into an industry position after that. So being able to say, my PhD work was not entirely academic in nature. It has application in the industry. We worked with this company on this project to accomplish that goal, also holds a lot of weight. So those were maybe two of the biggest skills or experiences that I think prepare you for industry.
Great, thank you for that. So Rachel, we're going to come back to you. We lost you for a second, but you're back. I'm not sure if you heard the question, but I just wanted to hear about the skills that you gained during your doctoral studies that you think had the most weight during your application process, during this transitional process. Like, what did you take away, or are you able to take away from your PhD experience, and you're going to be able to transfer to a non-academic career?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple things that are sort of like the obvious ones when people think about the humanities, which would be like critical thinking and communication, and those definitely hold. But there were two things that really became important. I discovered as I was doing the job search, and the first one was dealing with ambiguity, and the second one was dealing with multiple different sources of information. So some of these are applicable to like all degrees. Some of them are kind of more specific to the humanities or to history in particular. So the ambiguity thing, that was something, it was a sort of term I used in a couple of cover letters. And, I was like, history, we're dealing with ambiguity. There's no like right or wrong answer. It's all just sort of, messy, and you have to like put an argument on the past. And I found in interviews that idea really kind of stood out to people. They were like, oh yeah, ambiguity, like that's what we deal with. Like, that's really cool. And they were just really into the fact that I had highlighted that. And so I came to realize that that's actually pretty key for, I think, a lot of jobs. But, consulting in particular, it is very ambiguous. The other skill is in terms of kind of dealing with multiple sources of information. So in history, you can have sources that are like anything and everything. You can be looking at like account books, you can be in like numerical data, you can be in letters and memoirs and police reports and, anything and everything, or images, it all counts as data. And so we're used to kind of, dealing with all those inputs and kind of making sense of it. And so that was something that I also kind of highlighted. And someone else who's a history PhD had, independently of me talking about that, had also brought that up as something that like, historians, are good at dealing with. So I was like, okay, we're onto something here in terms of how these skills translate. So that's what I found to be the most useful. So basically it's like, thinking beyond like the normal things of, communication and kind of getting at like the heart of what you're doing in your degree, and how that can kind of transfer and kind of, I think it's always important to think creatively about what your skill set is.
Definitely agree with that last point you made there. It's all about sort of selling yourself. I don't know if I love that term, but really recognizing what your skills are and what you've been able to harbor over the years, and creating that package. This is the part of the discussion where all of the different backgrounds come in. I love the whole writing and publications portion that Julian brought up, and now this sort of sources and sources of information that Rachel touched on. So Smiti, can you tell us about any skills now that you acquired during your doctoral studies that you use every day, and maybe even ones that you might have wished you had more time to sort of sculpt and work on during grad school that you had to build up on when you transitioned into this non-academic career?
So I'll start with the one that I use day to day in my current role, and that's content creation. And that's something that was kind of funny. And so maybe why it's funny is because I guess we would frame it as like science communication or communicating with like, broader audiences. And it was a side project that I was actually doing. I created like a blog about like archaeology and travel and anything else that was on my mind, because I didn't want to write my dissertation, but I did want to write. So it was like, I guess, a productive kind of procrastination. But this side project was actually initially discouraged by well-meaning mentors in my field who were like, oh, that might like not set you up for like a career in academia. And I'm like secretly thinking, oh, yay, good. But it was a big draw for, I think, my current role, because they saw like, okay, like you're interested in creating content, you're fine with being on like social media, like you can write, you can summarize information, you can make that accessible. And I think Julian like talked about that like quite in depth. So I will leave that one there, but like content creation and, filtering that information and advice from very well-meaning people, but ultimately like cultivating a skill that like I wanted to learn. The other skill that I use day to day that I didn't even realize until like honestly a couple months ago when I was talking to a friend was strategy. And, so this is like, deciding what methods fit the question you're asking. Like I do this in my archaeological research all the time, or trying to hone in on like, okay, what's the real question here? Do we need to redefine what we're looking at? Do we need to reframe? Like questions about questions, anthropology for you. So, and then, how do we get from here to the next step? How do we start figuring out answers to a proposed challenge? And that, while I do feel like, that's a part of me as a personality, but like my research, my doctoral studies was very interdisciplinary. So like strategy was like really important. And that's something I think I utilize a lot. In terms of something I wish I developed, if I had an ideal wish, it would be that I took up like design thinking internships before like graduating. Now that comes with the caveat that I didn't know design thinking existed a couple of months until graduating. And I'm really not sure if those types of programs or frameworks were out there at that time. But I think that was something in my control that I wish I did, was that I wish I joined at least one student organization that was kind of industry focused, like just to connect and talk to people who wanted to go into a career outside of academia. And the reason I say that is because I didn't have the physical or mental capacity to learn another technical skill in graduate school. I was already learning a bunch of technical skills for my like mixed methods dissertation. But what I did get energy from was like, leaning into that extroverted part of me and like talking to people. So I wish I like tapped into that and intentionally built relationships and a network based on that kind of collective interest of not wanting to pursue an academic path, or at least exploring other options in addition to an academic path.
Thank you. Yeah, and I see that common thread here in not only this sort of round of responses, but in previous ones from all three of our panelists here, was sort of establishing those connections and getting out there and becoming aware of these opportunities. Rachel, you talked about going away from Hopkins and sort of realizing that consulting was a thing that you might have been interested in, and establishing those connections. Smiti, Julian, you talked about, inter sort of academic and industrial opportunities that you had and were available to you through your PhD and these desires to sort of branch out and do these internships. So that's great. I think that's super important and really good for the viewers here to hear. And it kind of touches upon a later question about advice, but if we don't get to that one, at least we've gotten some good advice from those 3 responses. But I know I'm definitely curious about what your day-to-days look like. So can you just give us a really brief snapshot of what you do on a day-to-day basis and how different or similar your work is to what you did as an academic or in grad school? Julian, can you start?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can speak a little bit, since I just made this transition within the past year back to a more academic environment. I can spend a little time on what I did as director of R&D at a company, and then how there are some similarities and dissimilarities to what I'm doing now. So R&D, running a small group, about a dozen people, very similar to how an academic lab functions. So I think my day-to-day was a lot of project management. Where do we stand on certain things? What have we learned? How do we need to pivot to meet our objective in whatever research we're doing? As the leader of a group, budget and those types of fiscal considerations. So what do we need to order to keep ourselves going? And I think all PhD students understand that to a certain degree, but depends on the lab. Sometimes reagents just show up and you use them, and sometimes you really have to keep track of what you're using. So it depends. And then really, as director of R&D, making sure that all of the minutia of what we're learning and documenting in the lab remain on our critical path to what are we trying to develop as a product or IP position or whatever the company is really aiming for. So that was that experience. And then now I'm at a new center that we're just standing up. That's, as you said, Marta, the Center for Biopharmaceutical Education and Training. And we're at the Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. And we really function at the interface of academia and industry. So not in the sense that I am doing my own independent research or building a lab in that respect, but our center is focused on workforce development for the biopharmaceutical industry. So there is a gap, and there are more jobs available with the need for skilled workers and not enough skilled workers with these unique skills. So we have a master's program that I'm the director of. So a lot of my time goes towards mentoring students and recruiting students, teaching. I do teach one seminar-based course for that. And we also have contract research capabilities at our center. So that harkens back to my previous role as in R&D. So we're able to do collaborative projects with industry, bring their proof of concept work further. So as a new center, we're doing a lot of building. This is our first year open. So really actually setting up our labs. It is kind of deja vu to some days in grad school and at my startup companies and at my more mid-sized company. Onboarding staff, recruiting both students for programs and staff as we continue to expand. So those are a lot of the administrative duties that I do. I'll be honest, you said sort of day to day. Some of my best days are when I don't get a lot of emails, and maybe we can all relate to that. But if I look back on certain days, it's many hours spent kind of prioritizing emails. Yes, I need to respond to this very quickly, or no, I'll have to remember to respond to that tomorrow because it's not as urgent. So maybe we're all inundated with that electronic communication. Certainly meetings are a day-to-day occurrence. Zoom, this is how I see a lot of people. But I do really get energized from some of the in-person meetings that we're still having or able to have, and we're doing work in our labs. And then I also really, I think, as I said before, I was never thinking of an academic career path because maybe it was a maturity at the time. I was just interested in research, developing new things. How do companies do this? and was not that passionate about research when I was a teaching when I was a PhD student. But I actually have really enjoyed interacting with students through the class that I taught last semester, and I was a bit not surprised by that, but yeah, it was a little unexpected. I didn't know how much I would really love seeing the same types of like sparks occur between neurons that happened for me when I was a student that now I can see happen for my students.
Yeah, it's funny how sometimes we sort of write things off and then they end up coming back into our lives later and we realize we really enjoy them. So that's really great to hear. That just goes to show to always keep an open mind and sort of take everything as it comes and try to make the best of it and learn from all of the experiences that you have. So thanks for that, Julian. Rachel, I know you haven't started your job yet, but what are you most looking forward to? Tuscany Strategy Consulting. Maybe can you tell us about what your job responsibilities will include, what you'll be doing?
Yeah, so I can tell you what I'm looking forward to. I can also tell you what I'm a little afraid of, which gets at some of what Julian was talking about, in fact. So I'm excited to be kind of back somewhere where I'm doing something that's more like concrete and structured. I'm not someone who thinks that much about like, having an impact on the world in like some like, grand way or anything. But I do enjoy things that are like, I made a thing and now it's done and now someone is seeing it and now we're moving on to the next thing. So something that just like feels concrete and feels a little bit more immediate. I'm excited about doing that. Consulting uses a lot of PowerPoints. I happen to like PowerPoint, so I'm eager to get in there and make some slides. I'm also excited, oddly enough, I'm excited for some teamwork, which if my like second grade self heard me say that, it would be like, what are you talking about? Because I used to always be like, I want to do my own thing. I want to do my own work. And now I've realized over the past, I don't know, several years, I'm like, oh, actually, like working with a team is pretty great. Like you can do really interesting things when everyone's kind of working to their strengths. So I'm excited about being in a collaborative environment after like being so isolated in academia. So that's, yeah, it's gonna be an adventure. I'm kind of getting back into this world. I can tell you also what I'm afraid of, which is email. So I've gotten used to the academic context where like, I don't know, maybe I look at my inbox like a couple times a day and like maybe I don't respond immediately. And to be honest, like I probably get one email a week that actually needs a response. And I really like that. And so I'm a little afraid of being back where I have to actually like be on top of the email. That's terrifying. And also kind of along with that, just the autonomy in an office environment is much less than what one has in academia, and there's pros and cons. I mean, I'm excited about structure, but also you get used to extreme autonomy in a graduate program, and I think it's going to be a little weird to make that switch. But yeah, I think it's every situation has pros and cons. So I think that this position will be kind of more the work style that I like. So we'll see.
That I love the pros and cons approach and sharing with us what you're not so excited about. Yeah, emails can be scary. Just remember to set boundaries for yourself and you'll be fine. As we all will survive the world of emails. So Smiti, can you tell us a little bit about your day-to-day and sort of tell us what you do and what you love, what you don't love, everything that you can share.
So, in my current role, like I develop programs, I, create content. It's really different every day. I talk to students and I actually have a lot of autonomy in like structuring my days. So I really appreciate that part of my job. I also stop working at 5. Like Typically, I really stop working at 5. My toddler comes home, we go outside, we run down hills, like we twirl in circles, and I can truly be present. Because with archaeology, for me at least, there's so much about like long-term projects that you do, whether it's like getting grants, whether it's writing, and kind of what Rachel was talking about, that kind of concrete, tangible, like I accomplished this today or even this week, that's much harder. And I realized, like, for me, like, yes, I like long-term projects, but I don't like the pressure when that equates to like, okay, like if I don't do this, this is my like financial security, or this is like, how I'm measured for success. So the fact that I can like shut off every day at 5, and I do check my emails like after he goes down sometimes at like 9, especially have big events like this, just to make sure everyone's okay. But typically like after 5, I can just be present on like the projects that I want to work on. And that's typically my family. And so, yeah, sometimes I use the weekends like here and there for like other things, but like having that ability to just not be working 24/7 has really like rejuvenated like my creative energy and just my overall like happiness. So that's the one part of my day-to-day that I wanted to mention. But if you want to know more about what a life design educator does, like feel free to tweet me. So
yeah, thank you so much. That's great. I think all of these responses are so reflective of the differences between a life as a professor and what that life looks like when you're not a professor in a non-academic career. So I don't see many questions coming in. So I have plenty and I will keep them coming. Just a reminder to our viewers, feel free to pop them in the discussion. So this one was included in our original panel discussion, and I think I would love to hear your thoughts here. If you could, in 1 to 2 sentences, summarize any advice you would give to someone interested in a career outside of academia, which includes me, but is unsure of how or where or even if to start, what would you say? Rachel, let's start with you.
So this is probably what everyone hears all the time and is tired of hearing, but it's true. So I'm going to say it, which is talk to people. It's my one sentence. And everyone's talking about, informational interviews, and I can't remember what the life design term is. There's like sort of a specific sort of part of the prototyping phase. But it really is so true. That's how you find out what exists and what it's like without having to like commit to an internship or something, which is like, a huge amount of time. And so like I was exploring within consulting, I was interested in innovation consulting, which I, still am kind of interested in that. But I was like not really sure what it was. Sorry, I'm going on too long for the one sentence, but I just want to illustrate the importance of this. I wasn't sure like what it was. And I was getting nowhere with like Googling. And so I was like, wait a second, I know someone who worked in this. I will talk to her. And like that just answered all my questions. So talk to people.
Working is key. Good. I've definitely become aware of this over my time here, and Hopkins does a great job with providing us with opportunities to do so. So that's nice to know. Smiti, can you tell us what you think or what advice you have?
I do agree with talk to people. It's not just like part of the life design approach, but thank you, Rachel, for the shout out. But also that's honestly how I landed every one of my positions like after I graduated. So if I were to add on to Rachel's, I don't think I can do it in 2 sentences, but I would just want to empathize and say it's a very vulnerable thing to come to terms when you feel like the norm is one way, so maybe pursuing an academic path, and then realizing like, this is not maybe an option for me, or I need to pursue other options. So I understand that like vulnerability. And personally for me, when I feel vulnerable, even though I'm super extroverted, sometimes I just don't ask for help or even a conversation. So if you're feeling that way, it's completely valid, but that's honestly also like the best time to have a conversation. So to echo Rachel, talk to people.
Thank you, Eddie. Julian, what are your thoughts and advice?
Yeah, I feel like this is an echo chamber because can't stress networking enough, but maybe we can build like a 3-tiered cake or something. And the icing that I can add to it is Well, I think you heard that all of us have an interesting relationship with email. So beyond just, sending someone you might want to connect with an email, like a cold email, or connecting with them on LinkedIn, I mean, maybe I would just suggest literally talk with them if you can. Like, if you can find a phone number, be so bold as to cold call them. And I think that people would find it really refreshing if, in my day of doing all the things that I need to do, someone called me and said, I'm a graduate student. I'm really interested in, what you're doing, and wanted to see if you had a few minutes to talk now or later. Maybe that's old fashioned, but probably a good way to break in and get through to people. And then maybe the reading between the lines of my suggestions, that have confidence, have the confidence to do that, and know that as a PhD candidate, that's a great place to be. You are well respected in what you're doing, and a lot of people would be very interested to hear more about what you're interested in, what you're studying, and why you want to get where you want to get. So yeah, literally open your mouth and talk to people.
So much. I guarantee our viewers are benefiting from this, but I love all of this advice. And I love the whole 3-tiered cake. It's definitely going on Twitter. I'm going to steal that from you, Julian. Okay, so I'm going to just go for our fun question now. And then if no one else pops in a question in the discussion, I have a few more because we have a few minutes. But for a little fun question, if you could be anything in the world besides what you are right now, what would it be? You could take a second to think about it, but whoever wants to go first, just go for it. It can be anything. Sure, Julian.
Two things. One from when I was young and one from more recently. I always really admired air traffic controllers. I thought that was a really neat position to be in, like guiding something so big. And I don't know, maybe that analogy has stuck with me from how to manage a research project. Like you're managing something that's much bigger than yourself, or working in industry. Like you are one person, maybe directing a project that involves a whole team, big things like that. But just very simply, I thought it was a cool job when I was young. More recently, I think if I could do it all over again, I really like, I didn't mention this, but my PhD work focused on microalgae and how to use green biotechnology for biofuels and other bioproducts and plant protein. I have a kind of a deep appreciation for trees and ecosystems, and I think being an arborist would be a really fun job. You're out in nature, you really know what's all of these different species of trees, how they interact, how a forest works. And then I don't know if anyone has had the opportunity to see a very skilled arborist take down trees, but someone who can climb trees, take off limbs, it's an amazing skill and kind of an art form. So I would be interested in doing that.
It's like an art form, a workout, and a vacation all in one day. Great, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Rachel, what would you be if you could be anything in the world?
This is tough because I feel like I am kind of already doing now what I want to be doing. But I will say if I were independently wealthy, I would be living in the Lake District in England, writing novels, and then running an Etsy shop on the side or something. That's probably.
I love it. Love it. Okay, Smiti, can you share with us? And then we have some time for your closing remarks.
Echo Rachel and Julian. So if you asked me in my PhD, I probably would have said ethnobotanist, because I studied ancient plants and I struggle keeping them alive. So to merge that anthropology with living plants, it probably would have been ethnobotany. But like Rachel, I'm pretty happy right now. So in answering that question, I guess I would say like a baker, because I'm really bad at baking. Like I'm okay at it. So it would be like one, I would get that skill. And then if I was a professional baker, I think I would be okay with waking up early, and I'm not a morning person. And then, yeah, just like being able to like make nice baked goods for myself, because I spend a lot of money on that. So I say baker because it kind of fills like certain voids or like deficits that I think I have. Like waking up early, like following directions exactly, like, you know, like the precision of it all, but also like having something like tasty. So, but perfectly happy with my life right now. So.
Seems like everyone here is very happy with where they are, and I'm glad to hear that. So thank you all for being here today and for talking with me and providing such fantastic information and tips. Smiti, I'm going to pass it over to you to sort of close out in the entire JHU grad camp. I was happy to be here, and I hope everyone had as great of an experience as I did.
So much, Marta. So thank you to Marta and all our moderators and our panelists. Like this was truly like a collective effort, drawing on like expertise and experiences from so many people. So my co-organizers and I, and so that's Karen Marduk and Nadine Goldberg from the Life Design Lab, we just wanted to say thank you so much. And we really hope the students who attended, you know, got some valuable information, and just know the conversation doesn't stop here. Keep continuing to talk to people and connect. We're here for you, and I hope this has expanded your network and helped you realize that there are a lot of people who are invested in like helping you and excited to help you. So thanks so much, and that marks the end of the first ever JHU grad camp. So thank you, everyone.
Everyone, bye.
Thanks.
Wonderful job.